Welcome back to Made for More. I am your host, Holly J. Moore. I am a divorce lawyer who is passionate and on a mission to help you use the adversity in your life to grow and show up as the best version of yourself. I am joined today and every day, thankfully, by my producer, Aaron Bender.
We have an author on the show talking about the mind-body connection, hence the cup.
Yes.
Talking about that very thing. We have a lot of people on the podcast talking about the mind, not so much about the body.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
You're supposed to run with it. You run with it. You talk about the stoicism.
Yeah.
You talk about...
I know. Yeah. So one of the things, Aaron...
Follow the little buddy.
Yes. One of the things, Aaron, that I found very interesting in Ellie's book is there's a line in there that talks about stoicism and how Stoics believe you should sort of like suppress whatever's going on in the body, emotions or like anything like that. And, you know, we've had a Stoic on the show before, Justin Edison. So I would be interested to get his take on that. But yeah, so Ellie is all about the mind-body connection, and we cannot separate the two. And she's going to talk more about that.
Let's connect with her now.
Oh, God. We are joined today by Ellie Roscher, author of The Embodied Path and other books, too. Ellie, thank you for being here on the show today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So what does it mean to be embodied?
That's such a great question to start with. I think for me, it feels like I am inhabiting my body. I think that our society puts a lot of pressure on us to live in our minds, right? To live in our intellect, to move from our ego. And when we do that, that's just kind of one way of knowing, and we're suppressing this wealth of information and deep knowing that's happening in our bodies. So for me, to be an embodied person, I think about it, and it feels like the fact that I'm living from an integration of my mind and my body, where my body is a place where I am pulling resources from. I can sense my body is communicating with me, and I'm moving through the world dwelling in my body instead of leading just with my intellect, just with my mind.
Okay, so we're kind of just jumping right into the meat and potatoes here, but you know, I guess that's how we roll. So in your book, let me find the page. One of the things, and I want to, after this, I want to go back and talk about your backstory as a gymnast, because I found your story with your own injuries fascinating. But while we're on the topic of how the mind or the world and society is sort of telling us to disconnect and lead with our intellect and mind, I do want to talk about this one part in the book where it says, Stoics valued lack of passion as the highest virtue. The mind's job was to control the body and suppress emotion. And that little that text jumped out at me because we've actually had a Stoic on the show before. And yeah, and we'll have to get him back so that we can debate this point. But my question on that is, because I did find value in the Stoicism episode, and I've actually even referred back to it just to help me in my own life, I did find value in being able to manage emotions better. Absolutely. And particularly, you know, I'm a divorce lawyer, and so our clients are at a heightened state of emotion all the time. And sometimes I think that can be detrimental to us, where we're operating at this high level of sort of raw emotion and not always making the best decisions when we're in that state. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Totally. Yeah. Thank you. I love Stoicism and I use it all of the time.
Okay.
So I'm not countering that point. I think about the thinking, feeling, and doing triangle. I can get stuck in the feeling and doing loop. And so actually thinking is a really beautiful balance for me and how my body is wired. And where I hear you is that some of your clients get stuck in the feeling and doing, and they're acting out of these really intense emotions. And to bring the thinking back into the triangle is going to be super, super balancing. Okay. So I do think that I think of embodiment as that integration, right? That it's not that we're just living out of our bodies or acting out of these emotions, but that we have a regulated body, a regulated nervous system, and that we're able to pull from both our intellect and our bodies to move through the world in this way that feels more like that balanced triangle.
Okay.
In our society, we do value like the labor of intellect over the labor of the body. Like historically, women have done labor of the body in terms of bearing children, right?
Yeah.
Raising children. And that doesn't always get valued the same way. Or if you think about some person who does physical labor for their job, right? We do value sitting still, and the philosophers and the politicians of his history and then today. And so I'm just calling for a little bit more balance where we don't only go to our intellect as a way of knowing, but we can also go to our bodies. But I would add that caveat that it is that balanced nervous system, right? So that embodiment isn't just about trusting this roller coaster of emotions, but noticing the fluctuation, noticing how we feel. The self is actually the thing that is noticing the sensation in the body and gleaning information from that, gleaning information from the thoughts, and then moving through the world with kind of all of those pieces at the table, if that's helpful.
Yes, very helpful. So you mentioned the triangle a couple times. Tell us more about that. Explain to us what that is.
So I call on, I don't know if you know the personality test, the Enneagram. I'm an Enneagram 2. And so I'm a big feeler. And kind of every personality test that you could use pulls of like, I'm someone who feels deeply, and I'm an empath. I have some intuition, and that's my superpower if I can put it in balance, right? And so if we think about mind, body, spirit, or mind, body, being, I'm always looking for practices that activate all three parts of who I am, and then I can move through the world. That's to me when I'm feeling fully resourced, is when I'm pulling on all three of those threads and kind of braiding them together in my actions. So we have folks who it's soothing to them to stay in their minds and to try to think their way out of problems. We're learning more and more that everything that happens to us happens in our bodies. And so we have pain that's in our bodies. And so we have to tend to those bodies if we're going to heal. We can't just think. And so one of the people I call on is Gabor Mate, who talks about how we've been taught to suppress emotion in the body, but that's actually labor. We're putting effort into not paying attention to our bodies and living in our thoughts. And that labor is leaving us exhausted too, right? So healing is hard. Turning toward our bodies and noticing the pain that is there, doing some healing work is hard, but so is that work of not healing, of pretending that we're okay, of overriding our bodies when our bodies are saying, I'm tired, I have needs, I need food, I need water, I need rest. And sometimes that's when we can get overactivated in our feelings, as if we've been suppressing them for a long time, and then all of a sudden they kind of come out sideways as a geyser, instead of being this really kind of gentle way where our feelings are informing us on a more sustainable pace.
Got it. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so let's go back a little bit. Because I thought your story was really interesting. You were a gymnast and you had an injury. Tell us a little bit about like your experience and with that, and how that informed your work today.
Totally. So this is maybe one of the most formative moments of my life, and it was definitely the birth moment of this book, The Embodied Path. When I was a really competitive little gymnast, and when I was in the 8th grade, I had just learned a new tumbling pass that I was going to go compete at in a meet in a different state. And right at the end of practice, I was practicing that tumbling pass, and I lost my air awareness. I started over-rotating, and I put my arm out to protect myself so I wouldn't land on my head. My arm flew in the wrong direction. It was a horrible elbow injury, double dislocation, compound fracture, the whole bit.
Yeah.
So in healing from that injury, the healing was going really, really slowly, and I was very frustrated. I wanted to get back into the gym. And so my orthopedic surgeon ended up kind of looking at this little 8th grader and saying, okay, we weren't we weren't going to tell you how serious your injury was. But I had walked into that doctor's office feeling like a victim, concentrating on what I couldn't do. I was so frustrated by what my body couldn't do, and I kind of felt like the victim. And he gave me a new piece of information. He said, you know, when you came into the emergency room, you had no pulse in your hand. You had lost all blood flow, and your limb was starting to die. And so we had the operating table set up for a full arm amputation. They hadn't told me that yet because it ended up being okay. It ended up working out, and they thought that that information was pretty intense. But because I was so frustrated, he thought it would be helpful to know how serious my injury was so I would be a little bit more patient in my healing. Right. And what happened in my body in that moment is really, really beautiful. Like in a singular moment, I went from feeling like a victim to feeling really, really lucky. All that bitterness fell away, and I just felt super grateful that I had two arms. And instead of focusing on what I couldn't do because of the injury, I started focusing on what I could do because I hadn't lost my arm. And really, what happened in that moment, the trauma was the same. The trauma had stayed the same, but what changed is I got a new piece of information for my story. So I started telling a different story about my elbow injury. Instead of being the victim of the story, I was lucky. And I was going to
perspective is everything.
That's right. That's right. So I was going to go live the rest of my life and show everybody what I could do with two arms, right? And it was in that way I was able, even though it was hard and it was very painful, it was such a formative moment where I started looking at the whole world by what I do have instead of what I don't. And that, like, that embodied gratitude came from my story shifting. So I became really interested in what stories we tell and how shifting those stories can shift how we move through the world. And so this book is a book of body stories, asking folks to think about what happened to their bodies and then what story they tell about it and how shifting that story could have a role in our healing.
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking of shifting stories, one of the other parts of the book that really stuck out to me is it's towards the end of the book where you're talking about like getting on a scale. Well, I think it was actually somebody else's, you know, experience, because you write about various people's experiences in the book. And it says, when you step on a scale, be it digital or old school, there's a moment of pause before a number presents itself. In that brief, fleeting moment, you can be anything, anyone, thin, healthy, beautiful, stable. Then a number appears, an indisputable number, a number that you attach a story to, affecting how you tell yourself who you are and what you deserve. And oh my gosh, I could resonate with, like, relate to that so much, because I mean, I literally haven't weighed myself in a long time, but I remember when I used to, I would like hold my breath, and it's like, you know, it could lead to having the best day of your life or going on suicide watch.
Totally.
And it's like, how ridiculous is that?
That's right.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's really powerful. Oh, thank you for sharing that. I feel so strongly. I haven't stepped on a scale in decades.
Yeah.
And numbers tell such powerful stories. So when I do work around this book, I ask folks what numbers have been important to your story. For some folks, it's the number that comes up on the scale. For other folks, it was their grade point average or their test scores, right? For some folks, it's their salary, right? Or, you know, how many kids they have. Numbers, we attach so much power to numbers.
We do. Why do we do that?
I know. Well,
oh my gosh. You're so right. Like all the numbers. Why are we like that?
And how could we maybe shift how we think about ourselves and how we move through the world? You and I both deciding to not have a scale and to not attach to a particular number. That has been part of, I would argue, our healing story, right?
Oh, 100%.
That we are enough. And that number isn't, so for me, one of the numbers I've let go of is book sales, for example. Okay. You know, what number of book sales would make me feel like enough? you know? And like, that's not the measure that I want to have. Our society is obsessed with numbers and that
Yes.
ladder, and more is always better. And I think it's really interesting to just reflect on how numbers have played a role in our stories. And are those numbers working for you?
Right.
Right? In terms of you feeling like a healthy and whole person. And if they're not, then maybe it's time to like really take a look at your relationship with those numbers and maybe be brave enough to set them down and use a different metric for your worth as a person.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, immediately what comes to my mind is like social media, numbers of likes, numbers of follows. Like, yeah.
Totally.
Wow.
And what number would be enough? You know that, I mean, I think that so often we just move the finish line further and further.
Always moving the goalpost. Always.
And so then we never arrive, and that's just kind of not how I want to live my life, right?
That's really interesting. Wow. Okay, so kind of back to our bodies. Okay, actually I want to read a passage from the book again because I think it's really good, and then we can talk about it.
Okay.
You start off saying, mind-body dualism is simply not working. Our bodies are wise, and we can only override their signals for so long. This immediately makes me think of the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Yes.
I'm sure you're familiar. Yeah.
Yes.
We cannot think our way out of a feeling problem. Ignoring our bodies delays healing. By inhabiting our messy, powerful bodies, we can contend with both the trauma that has happened to us and the trauma that we have inherited. So what do we need to do to sort of get closer to this, where we are connected and we are working on healing, you know, traumas of our generation and past generations and all of that?
Yeah. So for me, we're all wired a little bit differently. So we're all going to have slightly different pathways back home to our bodies. For me, the three things that work really well that I present in the book as possibilities are conscious breathing, movement, and reflective writing. So for me, the breath, we're always breathing. We just don't always choose to notice it. And I'm a yoga teacher. Yogis believe the breath is what connects the mind and the body. It's also what connects the inside and the outside world. So anytime we choose to turn toward our breath and notice it, it's this beautiful, the exhale kind of creates this pathway down back into our bodies where we can notice how our bodies are feeling. The more quiet and still we get, the bodies can communicate to us differently. And if you think about this, even in terms of romantic relationships, for example, the moments when I have felt the most loved are the moments where I feel really heard.
Yes.
And I think that that's true for our bodies as well, is that when our bodies feel like we're listening, when our bodies feel heard, that's a way of showing our bodies love. A loved body is going to soften and open up and communicate more clearly and remind us what our bodies have been through, and that remind us that our bodies have needs. I think one of the things going on is that we don't like to think about the fact that we're mortal, that our bodies are limited, and so we want to ignore those signals to our bodies that they have limits. And our society also highly values very efficient, very productive, very able bodies. And so again, we're taught to move faster and kind of ignore our bodies, and then that forces our bodies to speak louder to us. That's when we get sick, right? Or burn out. Right. So the breath is just a way of every once in a while throughout the day kind of following an exhale back in and checking in with how my body is feeling and what it's trying to communicate with me. Hearing it is one step, and then responding to what we hear is another, right? So if our body is saying, I'm exhausted, have we built in time to our schedules to actually rest? And rest being different than sleep, right? Yeah. Movement, I'm a kinesthetic learner. I think the best when my body's moving. I was a college athlete, right? And so I love when my body is moving. That's one way that I remember that I have a body and that it's powerful, and that I get to inhabit this beautiful, powerful body to move through the world. And then reflective writing kind of goes back to that elbow story of we're always telling ourselves stories. You know, we'll go back to the scale. Like you and I would tell ourselves stories about how much space is okay to take up in the world, how How is our worth tied to how much we weigh? What story are we telling ourselves about that? And so by looking at the stories we tell ourselves about our bodies and shifting those, we can recognize, I'm very big on like, oh, I haven't been through any trauma. And now we've already talked about one of my stories, like the elbow was trauma, right?
Yeah.
But I do comparative suffering, and I like to do like, I'm fine. I haven't been through much. Yeah. And that's not actually serving me. I don't have to compare to other people's suffering, but when I tend to everything my body has gone through, my body then starts to be warm and open and trust that I'm going to take care of it, right? And then that becomes this place that can be home. It can be a place for me to dwell and inhabit. And again, not that I'm shutting off my brain, but that I'm integrating my mind and my body into how I move through the world. So for folks, it's reflective writing and movement and breath might not be the three. Some people really like stillness versus movement. Some people love to turn on music and dance. Some people like their connection is through laughter with other people. But anything that reminds us that we actually have a body and that our bodies are experiencing everything and holding on to memories. And that's where the reflective writing is really lovely. It's like what memories are kind of stuck in there. And by taking them out and looking at them, can I sift through some of that stuckness of these hard stories that are kind of planted in my body. When I get to be the author of the story and create some meaning around them, then I kind of build up that friendship with my body, which for better or worse is the body I'm
You're stuck with it. We're all stuck with it. Might as well make friends with it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So I think a lot about there's a space in my body that's there for me to enter into and inhabit and dwell in and move from. That's not meant to be filled with stuff. It's just a home, a place where I'm not trying to escape. But where I feel safe.
Yeah.
And so whatever practice kind of helps you come back to that deep knowing of who you are and what your body has been through. Those are practices that we can invest in to build that integration back in.
Yeah. When you say like we need to do things that remind us we have a body, I mean, I almost want to like giggle when you say that because it sounds so funny, but on the other hand, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we've literally gotten so disconnected as a society. Right. We've become so obsessed with hustle culture and productivity and efficiency that like we actually do need to remember we have a body and to listen to it.
That's right. Yeah, so one of the things I teach yin yoga, and yin yoga, you kind of get on the floor for the whole hour and you prop yourself up and you practice softening. And I'm having more and more people come to yin yoga coming in hot off their like they've just been going a million miles an hour and they're just desperate to get on the ground and rest. It's like we can pepper that into our day so we're not just like screeching into yin class desperate for rest, right? And these are the people that are actually practicing it. Some people just go straight through their day right till it's bedtime and they wonder why they're having trouble sleeping.
Right.
It's like rest is different than sleep and our bodies need both of those things. And the reason I get so fired up about that in particular is our bodies need rest as well as sleep in order to do things like dream and collaborate and heal. And so I just think our society is going to do better if more of us are rested and capable of dreaming and collaborating and imagining and building beautiful things, right? So the body that is exhausted is not the body that's going to create. It's going to be a body that just survives. And I would love to see more of us thriving.
Yes. Yeah. So when you said, we need to also learn how to listen to our body, what came to my mind is, occasionally I'll be like, I'm tired. And my husband will be like, then rest, then take a nap. And I'm like, what? Who does that? And I think it's partially because I grew up in a house, like my parents are amazing. I have no complaints about my childhood. I'm extremely blessed. But the fact of the matter is I did grow up in a house where, you weren't really allowed to sit down.
Right.
It wasn't acceptable to like sit around and rest and, sleep in and all of those things. So I don't know if you're a parent or no, you are. Yes. I read that in the book. Mm-hmm. So from a parent's perspective, so that we are, not creating another generation of people who feel guilty for ever sitting down. What do we do as parents to sort of start teaching our kids these concepts?
Yeah, that's so good. So one of my taglines is resting is not quitting.
I saw that. Yes.
We believe the lie that we are what we do. And so the more we do, the more we are. And I do think it's coming from a beautiful place. My parents also parented me that way. I was so internally driven that to tell me to do my best was not a good parenting role, because you never arrive at your best. You can always, push harder. Yeah. And so part of my parenting is teaching my kids that there is such a thing as good enough. You know, and that it doesn't always, not everything has to be your best all of the time. Right. And to kind of build that sustainable pace, I think unstructured time is really good for my kids. And like knowing that I talk to them about how playing is their full-time job, right? That children need to play. It's so good there for their brains. It's so good for their creativity. It's really good for adults too. Yeah. But like just like letting them have unstructured time, almost tempting them being bored. They don't get bored because they're so creative and imaginative, but like not overstimulating them to the point where they have this kind of unstructured playground to be in their minds, to be in their bodies, and to do things that's not productive, that doesn't make sense. So part of it is this not giving into this over-structured time where you think you have to get your kid into all of the camps and all of the tutors, and you're not a good parent if you're not setting them up for Harvard. It's like, we got to get out of that game and realize children need a lot of unstructured time to play and to be. And I have that voice inside of me being like, am I being a good enough parent? And I have to just like double down on how much I believe in good enough and rest and play, and that they have a lot of structured time at school. And so when they're home with me, that it's okay if the time is low stimulation, slow, quiet. Right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's very true. Why do you think we are so tough on ourselves in terms of, I mean, it runs the gamut, right? Parenting, work, productivity, all the things. Why are we so tough on ourselves?
So a couple things. One, I always go back to kind of at the societal level, what we value and what we monetize. So I just feel like our society is always saying more, faster, better, more efficient. And, that's from Industrial Revolution till now, just more. And like the more we create conveniences, it should be giving us more time, but it actually just raises the bar on our excellence of like the more time we have, the better we should be doing with it. I also do wonder if social media is playing a role in this, where we can now constantly can be comparing ourselves to other parents, to other people working out, to other people in our jobs. Like if you run the gamut between LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook, like we get to constantly compare ourselves to our friends and our colleagues and gurus, and so and there's no arriving. And so in this society that just says more, it's our job to choose what we're going to do less of and where we're going to place our focus. And when you talked about numbers with social media, we keep moving the finish line further and further away, and then we never just arrive at enoughness because the metrics are skewed, where just more is more. And so then we are in charge of creating the boundaries around our social media intake and engagement. We're in charge of creating boundaries around which numbers we give power to and what metrics we're using for our own success, right? And I think that's where one of the places I want to bring our bodies into it is like, can we use a well-regulated nervous system and like a rested, resourced body as one of the things that's saying you're doing a pretty good job, you know, is that you're not perpetually exhausted, but you have enough energy to be a creative, right? To do good work, to really connect with the people in your life. Sometimes we're moving so fast, we don't even have the time to connect with our people. And that's one of the reasons loneliness is an epidemic right now. So how do we build a pace that leaves wiggle room for real connection with our own bodies, but then with each other as well?
Yes. So for my final question, if you had to tell somebody to just do like one thing today to sort of get closer to embodiment, what would you suggest that they do?
So I love breath because it's always there. You don't need to buy anything, right? You don't need to, right? And you get to choose how many breaths you want to place your attention on. And so people, I try to make little homework assignments like offensively small so that you giggle a little bit. Like there's no way you're too busy to do this, right? So an offensively
also we're trying to do less.
Right. We cannot have 38 things to do to be embodied.
Right.
So if I were to do an offensively small thing, it would be to invite folks at some point in your day to be conscious of 3 of your breaths. And one of my favorite things to do is to start my awareness at my tailbone, and on my inhale, just work my awareness up to my midbrain, and then on my exhale, drop it back down to my tailbone, and just do 3 loops of those inhales and exhales. So that shuts the outer stimulation down. We're remembering that we're creatures, that life is flowing in and through us. And then it also creates that pathway between our minds and our bodies that then we can start to move through the world, you know, speaking from a place that's pulling from our mind and our heart, speaking our truth there, and kind of moving through the world fully integrated and fully resourced. So 3 loops is a place to start. And I can do that kind of even as I'm moving through the world, or I can stop and really turn toward it. And if you love it, then maybe 3 becomes 4.
Yeah. I love that. It's very, although, I mean, I'm about to say like, it's so simple, we can all do it, but you know, most of us won't. That's the reality, right? I am going to try to do it though.
That's great.
3 breaths today. Like we could all do that. Yeah. I love that. That's wonderful. Ellie, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been great.
My pleasure. You're a delight. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got just a little bit more to say. So here's the real deal, guys, is when I was having that conversation with Ellie, what I really wanted to do in the moment when she said the thing you can do today is just do 3 breaths, turn your attention to 3 breaths. What I really wanted to do is say, let's just do it right now. And then I got in my head about it and I thought, that'll really be boring for the people listening and watching. Everybody will tune out. Is that weird? And I had all these stories in my head about it. And I put certain, you know, perceptions onto it that I shouldn't have. I should have just done it. But what's done is done, but we're going to do it now. So turn your attention to 3 breaths with me so that we can start on the journey to being more embodied. Ready? And never forget, you were made for more.
You almost lost it.
I know.
You almost lost it.
That was so weird. Why?